Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning into this evening's live broadcast from Facebook headquarters in Dublin as we launch a new national support network for younger stroke survivors. Most people think that stroke is an older person's disease only, but stroke can actually strike at any age. And last year, over 2,000 people of working age had a stroke in Ireland, and that number is continuing to rise. Stroke is effectively a brain attack, and for many people, the consequences are devastating, both physically and psychologically. But up until now, there's been no support to help younger people who are affected, even though it's really well known that support is vital to recovery. And that is why the Irish Heart Foundation is setting up this network, and they want as many working age stroke survivors as possible to sign up as members of the Facebook group. The group is called Life After Stroke, and you can search for it easily through Facebook. Once you find it, just press Join Group and it'll give you accessibility. And a meeting is also going to be held next week in Croke Park for younger stroke survivors dealing with issues such as relationships, return to work, depression, anxiety and positive mental health, and also communication difficulties and fatigue. And the Irish Heart Foundation has committed to holding further meetings in any part of the country where enough people are interested. The aim is to connect as many younger stroke survivors as possible, because only another stroke survivor can really understand what life for a young person is like after stroke. First of all, this evening, I'm going to be speaking to Karen Donoghue and Paul Keoghan, two stroke survivors who are here to share their stories and insights with us, and then to talk a little bit about why this network is so important and what it's going to do. Guys, thank you so much for joining us here and talking to us this evening. Can I come to you first, if that's okay, Karen? You were very young when you got the diagnosis of stroke. Can you just tell us how it affected you and how that felt for you as a very young woman?
Well, I was 28 when I got first diagnosed with my first one. I had two. And initially, there was something wrong with my left side. And I just rang my mother saying, I think I'm having a stroke. There's something wrong with my left side, laughing about it. So I'm not even thinking that I was having a stroke. And then in the end, I went into the hospital. They did an MRI. And then they told me, you're after having a stroke. And I started crying and I was like, I thought only old people have strokes. And they were like, no, sorry. So that was it.
And how does that affect you afterwards? Obviously, the physical effects, Karen, were they long-standing?
Yeah, my whole left side. I wasn't able to move my left side. And my leg is the more affected now. After a couple of years, my leg is the worst affected. I'm wearing a foot splint and ankylosing, which helps me walk. And my left hand isn't as strong as it was before,
But you're getting there.
I'm getting there, yeah.
Psychologically, a 28-year-old woman thinks it's all ahead of her, never imagines for a minute that this kind of thing might happen to you. I imagine at first of all it's shock and you can't believe it, but then when it starts to sink in, how did you feel?
Well, after I came, I was like kind of a long rehab stint, like about 8 months in hospital. And then when I left the NRH, National Rehabilitation Hospital, it's just kind of a reality check. I'm like, there you go, we helped you with all your splints and wheelchairs and walking aids, and we set up physio for you, but like, this is it, like, you know, you have to live your life. And so I was like, kind of freaking out. I was afraid to leave the house. I was like, what if I fall? What if somebody bashes into me?
You're afraid to leave the house?
Yeah, well, just gradually, and then I started kind of leaving the house, getting the bus on my own and things like that. But it's like, you just have to start from scratch, really, and just kind of work your way up, I guess.
Yeah. How are you now? I mean, how long ago was that?
That was in 2011, so 6 years ago.
Yeah, and then?
And now I'm doing okay. I'm still wearing my splint. I don't think I'll ever be able to be back to where I was. And I'm working on my left arm, kind of. Just physio and things like that. And yeah, so.
Had you ever met anyone, Karen, who was your sort of age who had had a stroke? Had you ever heard of such a thing?
No, never. I heard of a younger person, like a 2-year-old who had a stroke, a neighbour of mine, and I just didn't think about it. And like, a couple of like elderly people like 60 plus, having a stroke and things. I was like, oh God, that's terrible. Not even thinking about it, just went straight over my head. And then
did you find, because you didn't know anybody who was your age who'd had one. Was that a very isolating place to find yourself? 28, stroke victim.
Yeah.
Your peers were all talking about going to nightclubs and
No, I just wanted to be
meeting
in that.
men
I just wanted to be in that crowd, but I couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't, and it was a lonely time for
Yeah.
me when I left the NRH, and I had nobody to talk to. And as you said there, like, you know, people who had stroke, are good to talk to if you know what I mean.
Sure.
If they had a stroke kind of thing, and so it was a bit of a lonely time. And later on, I attempted to set up a stroke support group for the younger people, and just to try and talk to people. And I found about 3 people who were young enough, like they weren't as young as me, but they were young enough. But like that kind of fizzled out. But I'm delighted that this is happening
Sure.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm sure it was. I'm sure. I can only imagine how lonely and isolating and difficult it is to find yourself doing something so out of step
Yeah.
to what everybody else you knew was doing.
Yeah. And people, they were living their lives. They were, you know, married. They were having kids and stuff. And I was kind of left at home kind of thing. Not feeling sorry for herself, you know.
Can I bring you in, Paul Keoghan? You were even younger than Karen when you had your stroke.
Yeah, well, for me, originally I had a brain hemorrhage when I was playing a game of football, and that was when I was 16. And then what they found, I actually recovered from the brain hemorrhage. I was only in hospital for 2 weeks, and like I had no side effects, so I was really lucky in that I managed to recover from the brain hemorrhage. But then what they found was I had an aneurysm. So basically a weakness in one of the veins. And so I had to get an operation to get my aneurysm clipped. And unfortunately it was during the operation that I had the stroke. At this stage I had just turned 17. But now luckily I suppose I was like, if you're ever going to have a stroke on an operating table surrounded by doctors, like, you know, you could like
that is the silver lining.
Yeah.
But that's, I mean, at 17, you know, even in terms of maturity, trying to deal with something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's funny the way Karen was saying when she found out she had a stroke, immediately she was devastated. Like when I found out I had a stroke, like didn't register with me at all. Like I think I had a stroke one week, and I remember I was meant to be going to a Debs the next week, and like 3 or 4 days before the Debs, I thought I was going. You know, I didn't realise my situation. It didn't resonate with me at all at the time. You know.
You were told at the time when it happened to you, though, Paul, you were given some fairly bleak outlets. You were told probably couldn't do your leaving cert, probably wouldn't be playing sport and all this kind of stuff. That's not how it's panned out for you.
Yeah, like I think one of the scariest things about having a stroke is kind of the unknown. You know, like when you have a stroke, the doctors, they can't tell you how severe your stroke has been. They kind of just have to say, we'll wait and see kind of thing. Do you know what I mean? Which, like I was told, yeah, you might not ever do your leaving cert and you might not go back to sport. And yeah, obviously it's really scary prognosis to get. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of it comes down to how you react to that news.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And if you...
And clearly you reacted very well, because not only did you do your leaving cert, but you've gone on to college and you've done all that and you became a Paralympian. So
yeah,
the bleak outlook that you were given was not what came to pass.
Yeah, exactly. Like again, I suppose it's just a matter of trying to stay positive the whole time, which like it's not always an easy thing to do. But again, like it is a lonely place to be, you know, when you like at that age, or even at any age, I'd say anyone less than anyone of a young age at all. You know, like it's very hard to relate to other people. You know, like your family and your friends can have the best of intentions, but they don't really understand. You know, you need someone who's been in a similar situation to you to relate to you.
How did you feel at the time, Paul, when you were kind of told, oh, you might not be able to do this, you may not be able to do that? Did it just not register at all, or did at some point you go, what the hell is happening to my life? Was there some kind of penny dropping?
Well, the only experience I had of a stroke before was my granny, and she had a very severe stroke when she was in her 70s, and unfortunately she was very dependent then, and she moved in with us, and she kind of lived out the last couple of years of her life, but unfortunately she never really recovered from the stroke. So like I couldn't even to that, I couldn't relate to that. No. You know what I mean? So it just didn't dawn on me. I'd say it took even 6 months to a year before I even registered what happened. You know what I mean? Like, I just,
Would it have been really helpful if you could have talked to other young people who were in your shoes? You know, as you said, the only person you knew with a stroke was your granny. And that is the case, I think, we find with so many people who have strokes who are younger. They are put in with old age pensioners and all that kind of stuff in terms of their treatment. And it's extraordinarily difficult because you don't have your peers around you. Would support from other people who'd gone through it have been good?
yeah, absolutely. I think so. At the time, I don't think I would have appreciated, you know, at the time I didn't realize how much I needed that. Do you know what I mean? But I think just to be able to sit down with someone who, like someone of a similar age who could relate to what I was feeling, even some of the things like the tiredness and fatigue, you know, because other people, they can see your physical deficits, but the fatigue and different things like that people can't see.
Yeah.
You know, you need someone who's been through it to.
It has a big impact on your mood as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, anything. Yeah, like you do get mood swings. Everyone does, and I think.
It's an assault on the brain.
Yeah, exactly. It's just even trying to accept something like
yes,
that. You know,
and obviously it also has a psychological
Yeah.
impact, but there is an impact on the brain itself.
yeah.
If you have just joined us, we just want to remind viewers that this evening the Irish Heart Foundation is launching a new national support network for working age stroke survivors, and we do want as many survivors as possible to sign up to this Facebook page, Life After Stroke, which viewers can search for on Facebook and just press the join group and it will give you accessibility. And thank you, Karen and Paul, for sharing your stories. And you're really good because I think people seeing you guys here and saying they don't look like they've had a stroke, they don't look old enough to have a stroke, will, I think, make a big impact on people and just maybe challenge some of the ideas that we have. Can I bring you in, Pauline? This is Pauline Shields, obviously, who works in the National Rehabilitation Hospital. And you work with people around disability and sexuality and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, you've done a huge amount of work with stroke patients. Pauline, what do you find are the biggest issues for people, particularly younger people, when they're trying to come to terms with having had a stroke at a time in their lives when maybe they would never have expected it to happen to them?
I suppose the difficulty from my position working is that when they're going through the rehabilitation stage, they're looking at things like life and sexuality and relationships is not something that's often on the agenda. But the work I'm trying to do at the moment is about getting people to understand that the service is there now, because it's often after they've been discharged from the rehabilitation hospital that they might need to come and talk to people. So when I'm working with people, I divide it into two different sections. I divide it into the direct effects of the stroke on the individual and how that would make them be as in engaging in a relationship. And then I look towards the indirect effects, which are things like the body image, the self-esteem, the anger, the frustration, the fatigue, and how that impacts on a relationship. If I'm working with a couple, it'll be looking at the relationship issues and the impact that the stroke has had on the individual, but also on the couple, and on the partner of the person who's had the stroke, to try and get them to understand the difference between being a carer and being a partner. And I think to talk to people early on is very important, because it's very easy to slip into a carer role, but it's very important to be the partner. So it's to talk to them about that.
It must be incredibly challenging for somebody who is in their 20s or their 30s, or, you know, in Paul's case, his teens, to ever consider that their partner, their boyfriend, their girlfriend, their husband, their wife would ever be their carer. The idea you would need a carer when you're young is a massive psychological challenge. And in terms of how you see yourself, that must be extraordinarily difficult.
And so often I hear people saying, well, who would want me now? Particularly the single people who haven't gone out there and explored relationships and that. So it's to try
That's a big
and
challenge.
Yeah, it's to try and help them adjust to the life changes that have come about as a result of their stroke.
Yeah. Could I ask you guys, you heard what Pauline said there. Did those kinds of things go through your heads? Who would want me now? How will I go? How will I find my place now that I'm somebody who's young, who's had a stroke? Is that the kind of stuff that played on your mind?
Yeah, it would. It would have been. I was listening to Polly and I was agreeing, and I was like, yeah, you're right. But that's why counselling is needed. But in relation to counselling, it's a big deal here, and there's not a lot in counselling.
No.
You know, so
We're
it's
really short of psychology
Yeah,
for this, aren't we?
very long waiting lists and things like that. And for people who can't afford counselling, so
Did you relate to that, Paul? Did you think, those are the kind of things that I worried about myself?
Yeah, like I think certainly the biggest problem for me was that it took me so long to accept what had happened that, you know, like I've never really considered myself a stroke victim or a stroke survivor. And like I think it takes at a certain point you have to admit that you've had a stroke. I know it might seem obvious, but you have to just say, right, you have to realize that you're in that category. And yeah, it does. It's really tough on your self-esteem, and you know it takes a long time to kind of accept who you are and who you've become. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I'm totally sure. And Pauline, you're going to be taking a lead role next week at Croke Park. Will you tell us what's going to be happening, what you would like to achieve from this, this meeting to do with young stroke victims and working age stroke patients?
I think I see the aim of the day is to get the peer support there. There is going to be a short talk by myself just around the whole area of relationships and intimacy. But then they're going to break into groups, and we'll be covering various different topics, like you've mentioned, fatigue, the depression, going back to work, and I'll be doing some work around the sexuality and that. But I always think people, they relate best to people who have experienced this themselves. So it's hopefully to get people talking and get a big group together.
So this is in Croke Park next Monday, the 27th. And do you expect a big number of young people who have had, or under 65s or working age people who have had strokes to come and attend on the day?
Yeah, I think there's been an attendance of nearly 200 people, I think. I'm told I'm talking to 200 people.
So a big number of people. Because almost 2,000 working age people per year have a stroke. And I think, am I wrong in thinking that most people have no idea that I mean, that's about a quarter of all stroke patients. I mean, there's 8,000 strokes in a year. It's
Yeah, I think most people do think that it's an older disease, but we do experience a lot of young people with stroke.
Can I bring in Minister Denis Naughten? Thank you for coming. Minister for Communications, Climate Action and Environment. Thank you for coming. I know the traffic this evening is very bad. Everybody was wondering, would anyone get here? but Minister Naughten, why did you want to get involved in this initiative in the first place? Were you aware of the issue of younger age stroke patients, working age stroke patients?
Well, I suppose I've been interested in the whole issue of stroke from a medical point of view and an emergency response point of view for a long number of years. And we've been working with the Irish Heart Foundation to look at how we could improve the treatment, the emergency treatment for people. The perspective I was coming from was that treatment was only taking place in the major hospitals across the country. People in rural areas had to rely on ambulances to get there. And for every minute the treatment is delayed, someone loses 2 million brain cells. They progressively lose brain function. That has an impact in relation to their stay in hospital, their long-term prognosis. So what we've been doing is we've established an air ambulance service now, which is based in Athlone, which means that people can get treatment much quicker than would have been the case before. We're also now rolling out telemedicine stroke machines. Hospitals like Cavan have those now. They're linked up with the major teaching hospitals here in Dublin, and it means that those people in that catchment can get treatment very quickly for stroke. So that was my interest in relation to it. I suppose as Communications Minister and in charge of technology, there's huge opportunities there in relation to the health profession, caring for people, treating people, diagnosing people, monitoring people with the rollout of broadband across the country now. And I think one of the great things about this is you can have peer-to-peer communication. People can talk with people, even on the other side of the world, that have gone through the exact same experience. I've done a lot of work with rare diseases. In some cases, they could have very limited numbers of people in this country that have a particularly rare disease, but through technology they can talk with other people with that condition and explore treatment solutions and other challenges that they're dealing with. And the same in relation to stroke, particularly in relation to younger people with stroke. It's a way for them to make contact with other people, talk to someone that relates and can relate to them, and explore, therapies and treatments that can benefit them and benefit those around them.
Yeah, I know within your own constituency you have been an advocate for all this kind of thing, and I know you've been committed and involved with the whole setup for the air ambulance and all that kind of stuff. The idea, though, it's a very good one, that social media could be harnessed in this way. And for those of you who are just joining us, you are listening to a Facebook Live broadcast on behalf of the Irish Heart Foundation, and we're trying to get the message out there about the number of working age stroke patients in the country, and we want you to go to the Life After Stroke Facebook page and press join group, because there is support there, and we are trying to put a group together for people to offer each other support. But it was partly your idea to get involved with social media and to actually roll this out, Dennis, as a way of reaching people and connecting people, because as we heard from Karen, she actually tried to set up a support group herself and she found 3 people. Social media has changed the dynamics for people in terms of what we can do about connecting people together who have different issues.
Yes, and I think, look, that's the great thing about social media. It's not just the broad opportunities that are there for people to connect with friends and relatives across the globe, but also in areas such as this, that people feel very isolated, and it's not just physical isolation in different parts of the country, but it can be because, in this case, in relation to people that have strokes and young people that have strokes, to be able to relate to someone else that has gone through that experience or that is going through that experience, and to share that with them. I think social media can do that. It provides us with new opportunities to learn from each other, to learn more about different conditions, and to relate to each other. And I think that's the great thing about social media. And I think this is very new in relation to peer support.
Yeah.
I think it's very innovative what has been done here with Facebook and the Irish Heart Foundation. But I think our real difficulty in relation to health, the health services and technology, is that we really haven't explored the huge opportunities that are there. And as I say, it's not just in relation to treatment and monitoring, but it's also that psychological support, that peer support that can be available to people.
Yeah, and we know peer support is so important for patients with all sorts of issues, but it's additionally, I think, really important when you're in a small group. When you're in a small group, maybe that you don't know anybody else in the group unless you use something like social media. But also you can see how, if you have things like mobility issues, or if you did live in a rural community, Facebook, telemedicine, digital connectivity is massively important. And I hope the rural broadband scheme, as it rolls out and becomes more accessible to everyone, it's a really, really good tool. And I'm sure that the Irish Heart Foundation, and I'm sure anybody watching tonight, would be seeing the clever sort of synergy of hooking up social media and a peer support group like this. Pauline, if I could come back to you, the big issues around somebody younger having a stroke, would you say that they boil down to issues around returning to work, issues around relationships, and then issues around mental health, aside from the physical difficulties? Are they the big things that play on people's minds?
I think so, and I think they're all interactive and they all affect body image and self-esteem, and how somebody feels about themselves is going to, make them either sit at home and do nothing, or get out there and try and meet people and do things and go back to work. So I think it's really important for people, if they can, to be able to go back to work, to be able to do the driving if it's possible for them, because I think it has a huge impact on even their mental health.
Do we know what kind of proportion of working age stroke patients do in fact go back to work, do in fact go on, rebuild lives and get back to pretty much where they were before the stroke occurred? Do we have a sort of an idea around that?
I'm not sure now, to be honest, to be able to answer that from our perspective.
Would you have seen a lot of people who, when they go through the process of maybe counselling and all that sort of stuff, and their confidence and those types of things are improved, that they do get back to work, that they do find that quality of life post-stroke again? Do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think if you're to look at statistics, probably there's not as many that go back to work as we would like to be able to go back to work. And even we did have some research done recently on even people going back to driving, and there were the issues that they had for driving. Just it wasn't worth it for a lot of them, that they didn't actually take up driving, even if physically they were going to be able to. So
Yeah.
it does have a huge impact.
Is it an issue, Pauline, the fact that things like home care packages or, hospital-based treatments and all, they all seem to come through the same department as medicine for the elderly, as geriatrics and all that? So you could be 17, you could be 28 having a stroke, yet you may find yourself under the care of somebody like a geriatrician. Does that have an impact on how, younger stroke patients feel?
I'm sure it does. Like I say, a lot of young people, when they do have a stroke, it's kind of that disbelief, and the services aren't there for people to be able to have somebody younger look after them and look after the needs of the younger people. So they do end up being under the care of the older consultant, I suppose, because it's generally seen as an older person's disease.
Yeah. As I say, for anybody who is just joining us, this is Pauline Shields, who is a clinical nurse specialist in disability and sexuality in the National Rehabilitation Hospital, and Paul and Karen are two people who have had strokes at a very young age, and we are hoping to get people to sign up to the Facebook page Life After Stroke, and all you have to do is search for it on Facebook and press the join group button. I'm going to bring it back to kind of just to finish up and to wrap up to you guys, because this is what it's all about, trying to reach out to other people who have found themselves in your position. I'm sure, Paul, you never, as I say, would have thought that you would have been a stroke survivor or a stroke victim. You strike me as somebody who probably would never have thought of himself ever going to be a victim of anything, but that's probably true of lots of people who end up victims of things. But when you hear the stuff about maybe, the return to work difficulties and all of that, was there an awful lot to sort of overcome for you to go to college? Was there an awful lot for you to overcome to think about things like careers again? Was that a piece of a jigsaw that had to be fixed for you?
Yeah, it's funny that you actually said the word jigsaw, because it's like when you have a stroke, you've like a whole team of medical professionals, which, like, I think in other diseases usually you've a consultant, you've one doctor, but the complication, having a stroke can be so complicated because you have a speech and language therapist, an occupational therapist, a physiotherapist, a consultant, a GP, and you've just a whole team. And it gets very confusing. I suppose I wasn't really so much going back to work as I was actually I was trying to go back to school.
Yeah.
And I wasn't trying to learn how to drive. I wasn't going back to driving, I was learning how to drive. So you see, I was at an age where you have to learn to do everything anyway. Do you know what I mean? I was going to be starting college and I was going to be starting to learn how to drive. So I had more challenges to overcome, but I didn't feel like I was going.
You'd never learnt them any other way.
Yeah, so I was still starting from scratch, which I would have been anyway.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I just had kind of more challenges, I suppose.
That says a lot about a very positive attitude that you have, I think.
Yeah.
If you could ask the ether tonight, the Taoiseach, the government, the HSE, whoever, if you could ask them for a couple of things that would have made a big difference to you, or you think would make a big difference to other patients, is there anything you'd like to see happen?
Well, I think the biggest thing is early discharge. I know the Irish Heart Foundation have had a drive kind of for early discharge as well recently, where if they can get if there was more services in the community, which again poses challenges in that the services you need there's physio, you need so many different services. But if you can discharge stroke patients faster, reintegrate them into society and surround them with a medical team, then I think you could probably recover better. Now, I know the logistics of that is very complicated. But you'd like to be able to
access more stuff in the community?
Yeah, like I feel like I might have had, it was limited, the access I had when I was discharged was probably limited.
Okay. Karen, you've heard what everyone has to say here tonight, and obviously you've spoken yourself. The Minister has spoken about the need to roll out services, the importance of social media, and I think every single one of you has highlighted the importance of peer support. Yeah. Pauline has said that the big issues are about going back to work, about mental health, about relationships and all that. If you could go back and know stuff that you know now back then, when you first had a stroke, is there anything that you would have preferred to have happened differently? And obviously not having a stroke would have been a nice thing, but
Yeah.
but failing that, would you have preferred your aftercare, your treatment, your support networks? Would you have liked things to have been different than they were?
Just one thing I would wanted to change was the lack of counselling,
Yeah.
because I had to wait six months for a counselling session, and all they gave me was 6 weeks,
Yeah.
and that's not enough.
No.
And
Not for life-changing events.
yeah, and I tried to find other counsellors because I wanted one who has experience with acquired brain injuries, and I couldn't really find one, and they didn't really. They kind of related to me, but they didn't really, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But and then when I was looking for more counselling, I had to wait another 6 months, and then I got 6 weeks. This was in an acquired brain injury clinic, but I assume they're the same everywhere.
So
But
there just isn't enough resources.
there just isn't enough. Now in Dublin, I found the accessibility for physio, OT, the lot quite okay. Like, but in relation to rural areas, like, it would pose difficulties, the whole logistics side of things, you know, when
Yeah.
for the way people can't drive and things like that.
Yeah.
So that would be hard.
Yeah, no, it seems to me that's such a life-changing event landing on you in your 20s, and you waiting 6 months before you even get any counselling, and then you get 6 sessions.
I know, yeah.
It's like a stick and plaster on a hemorrhage, isn't it? It's
I know.
horrible. Obviously, this event on Monday in Croke Park, will you both be attending? Will you be speaking? What do you hope to get from an event like this?
Yeah, I think we're going to be there. Neither of us are speaking, but I think we're going to participate in
Yeah.
so much as we're hoping
Yeah,
everyone
just
else
trying to
will as
find
well.
some peers to
Yeah.
chat to, just
Yeah.
to understand.
Did you guys know each other before this?
No.
Or?
No, today we just met today now.
Just
There
that.
you are. Look, my sincere thanks to Minister Naughton, to Nurse Pauline, I shouldn't call her Nurse Pauline Shields, to Pauline and to Paul and Karen for talking to us this evening. I think, for a start, you guys are brilliant for sharing your story, and I know you're a bit nervous and everything, because it isn't easy.
It's great.
It is. But I think it's really important, and I think what you said is very relatable to anybody. I'm sure particularly people who've had a stroke, but to anybody, I can totally imagine
Yeah.
what it was like for you to find yourselves in the positions you did. But my thanks to everyone as well for turning in this evening to our conversation about stroke and the new national support network being launched this evening for younger stroke survivors by the Irish Heart Foundation. The Irish Heart Foundation is also organising that meeting next week in Croke Park for younger stroke survivors, and it will be dealing with the issues we've talked about here this evening, like relationships, like returning to work, like depression, anxiety and positive mental health, and about communication difficulties and fatigue, which are all sort of issues that I think people post-stroke, particularly younger patients, have. And there will be further meetings, because the Irish Heart Foundation has committed to holding further meetings in any part of the country where enough people are interested. And the aim, of course, is to connect as many younger stroke survivors as possible. So if you are a stroke survivor of working age, please do sign up tonight to this Facebook group, Life After Stroke, which you can easily search for on Facebook. Thank you, everybody. Press join group.